And so I started then, reading books on out of body experiences and metaphysical things, and started having some experiences myself. One thing that really stuck out to me is reading about out of body experiences, and then sharing with my brother, 2 years younger and very close with him, in sharing with him, like, hey, here's what I'm learning about this, these ideas regarding um, consciousness, and these people, lots of people claiming to have out of body experiences and astral projection. And he's kind of looking at me like, dude, you've lost your mind. What are you smoking?
With me today is Brandon Beachum. Welcome, and thanks for coming on the show, Brandon.
Thanks for having me, Rod. It's a pleasure.
Well, this is my first podcaster on the channel, and you're almost like one of the OGs of podcasting, actually. You've been doing it for a long time. So could you tell us, as an introduction, tell us about what your life was like growing up, and when did you first become curious about spirituality?
Yeah, I've been at the podcasting uh, game, if you will, for going on 10 years,
Wow.
2015, almost 10 years. And, definitely been a labor of love, getting the chance to wax poetic about spirituality and consciousness and the ultimate nature of reality, which is definitely a passion. And, to give you a little context, I grew up on the East Coast of the United States in Virginia, in a very is normal, if there is such a thing, conservative Christian household. Went to church 3 times a week, and my parents then shipped me off to Christian college. And about that time, as I've always kind of went to the beat of my own drum. So some of the ideas is very conservative, kind of dogmatic, hell and brimstone sort of, perspective on Christianity. Some of that started to not like necessarily resonate or quite add up for me. And then, with the assistance of getting kicked out of Christian college for being one of the quote unquote bad kids, aka normal, I I then met. I moved to Nashville, Tennessee, which is kind of nearby the college I got kicked out of, and met a woman who claimed to have some intuitive or psychic ability. And that was very intriguing to me. I hadn't come across that. And then she demonstrated some things that supported her claims, right? That then really had me curious. So that really was the beginning of, and that is probably, I don't know, maybe 1996, I'm going to guess, somewhere around there, 96, 97. And so I started then, reading books on out of body experiences and metaphysical things, and started having some experiences myself. One thing that really stuck out to me is reading about out of body experiences, and then sharing with my brother, 2 years younger and very close with him, in sharing with him, like, hey, here's what I'm learning about this, these ideas regarding um, consciousness, and these people, lots of people claiming to have out of body experiences and astral projection. And he's kind of looking at me like, dude, you've lost your mind. What are you smoking? And I was like, well, I haven't had them happen, but there's a lot of accounts that are similar, and it's very fascinating. And, and one of the things I shared with him in the first book that I was reading, it said that you could have these sorts of experiences by one, inducing it through meditation, sort of these certain techniques the author shared. And a little easier is if you could become lucid in your dream, become awake in the dream state. Then you could say, oh, I'm actually in bed asleep right now and I want to leave my body, and boom, you can pop out. That's what he claimed. So I'm sharing this with my brother, who's kind of making fun of me for believing it. And then he's like, well, you know, that lucid dreaming thing, actually, I know what you're talking about. That's real, because I used to do that as a kid. I'd become awake in the dream and then, start flying or whatever. Not necessarily feeling like he had an out of body experience, but just awareness of his waking world. Right. And so I was like, well, if it ever happens again, you should, say, I want to leave my body and see if it works. Well, later that night, here's the guy that's making fun of me, because we started talking about it. It triggered it to happen for him for the first time, in many, many years. And now he's remembering what I said. And he's like, okay, I want to leave my body. And next thing he knows, he's having an experience standing outside of his body, looking at himself laying there. And waving his hand in front of his face, and it's like just pure energy, and then flying through the ceiling. And my brother never was the first guy in line for the roller coaster. So it kind of freaked him out. So it went from one day him making fun of me to the next day him looking like he's seen a ghost, going, "Oh my God, that out of body experience thing actually does work. It happened." And it's happened to him, mind you, that's been a long time ago now, but sporadically over his lifetime, he's had these experiences, not really seeking them where I was trying to induce it, he was not. And so that was a cool sort of like confirmation. And then I started having, some others. One of the things I share in my podcast, Positive Head, uh, a lot of like stories of synchronicity and serendipity or spiritual breadcrumb kind of spiritual communication sort of experiences that I've had over the years. And I've had some pretty cool ones. And so those just started, soon thereafter, just these little breadcrumbs and confirmation from reading in another book how some person claimed they could communicate with animals, telepathically. And I'm in this expanded state like, oh, wow, what if that's real? Let me try. There's a moth, 10 feet away from me in my room. And I held my hands out and he flew across and landed in the middle of my palms instantly. Now I've tried that dozens of times since. It's never happened again. But in that moment, it was like spirit, I feel, was like, look, yes, here. I mean, it was pretty if you can imagine like something flying far away and you're like, come land on me. And then instantly, so I started having little things like that, and they've never stopped, like I said, some of the synchronicities and positive paranormal stories and things like that. So I can only think, as I started to read books like Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh.
Yeah,
I,
topic.
I,
Yeah.
I had the pleasure of having him as a guest on my podcast recently, and it was really cool because those books had such a powerful impact on me. And you're reading in those books this idea that we're one with the source consciousness that creates and animates all things. And I can only think, because it's my dharmic path to do the work that I've done, that was for me like very much like oh my gosh, of course it's structured this way. It's so elegantly simple yet complex. And what would be outside of source? Nothing, right? And like I said, because it is my dharmic path to do now thousands of podcasts on this topic, and write a book on this topic and talk to anyone who will listen, about it. That I think it was just like very much a remembering for me of like, yes, of course, this is it. Now let's share it and talk about it and explore it. And so, yeah, that's really how it all began. And I've never looked back. And of course, it's one thing to understand a lot of these concepts theoretically, and it's another thing to apply them to your life in a way that's really meaningful. And, it's like Mike Tyson says, everyone's got a plan till you get punched in the face. And so life punches you in the face a lot. And so, it's been a lifelong journey of actually walking the talk and, implementing a lot of these perspectives in a way that serve me. And, even I say on the podcast a lot of you oftentimes will teach best what you're learning yourself, what you most need to learn. So there's been a lot of that, sharing as I'm learning and things. And yeah, that's my story, how I got here, as concisely as I can tell it.
So have you had any experience that you would consider to be mystical that stands out for you in your lifetime?
Yeah, I've had a bunch of those. I've had some fun ones. I mean, wow. Yeah, just open-ended like that is interesting, because it's like, what would I share if you're asking for a story? I could share one that happened most recently that might that I think would be fun, and it's somewhat concise. So recently I had the first time what felt like a communication across the veil. And that was a few months back. I had a dream that I was connecting with my grandfather, and he passed in the 80s. And he was there with my grandmother, his wife, who I was really close with. His name was Joe Stone, and her name, we called her Moo. And so it was my grandfather and Moo. And in the dream, I was like, oh my gosh, I've got them on the line. I broke through, it was kind of that feeling that I'd done something, And so Joe is talking, And he's like, "Hey, Brandon, I have someone I really want you to meet. It's a friend of mine from World War II. His name is Peter Finch." I don't know who that is. I wake up, I'm half asleep, and I'm like, "You got to write this down." And I wrote on my phone, Peter Finch, World War II. Now, my grandfather was at Pearl Harbor when it got bombed. He was on the Utah, which was the first ship to get hit, and it's still sunk in the harbor there. He jumped and swam and luckily lived for me. And he had someone standing next to him that died. That was a friend getting hit by, kamikazes. And so when I woke up, I remember thinking maybe this is the friend that died next to him, or, I didn't know. And then, the next morning, luckily I was half asleep when I wrote it down. I'd kind of forgotten. Luckily I wrote it on my phone. So when I picked my phone up, the first thing I see is Peter Finch, World War II. I'm like, oh yeah. So then it's like, okay, is this really a real thing? Is Peter Finch even a real person? And actually, come to think of it, is he Australian? He might even be Australian. He is a real guy. I look up, there is a Peter Finch who died in the 70s. He was the first actor to win an Oscar after he passed for a movie called The Network. And I wasn't familiar with him, but as I'm reading, first I'm excited because, okay, it's a real person. Second, he's a big actor. And another sort of mystical thing that has happened is I have a friend who's a medium. And on my son's 18th birthday, I decided to give him a reading from her. And she was like, "Oh my gosh, Charlie Chaplin is coming through. I've never had a celebrity come through, but he's your son's spirit guide. Your son's going to be this big actor one day." And he'd never acted at that point. Now he's 25 and he's been in 50 productions in the last couple of years. Wow. He just won Best Actor in an Independent Film in the Los Angeles Film Awards. And, he's doing it. He's really in it, and he's in it for the art of it. He's into film, and really, it's not about getting famous or any of that stuff. He loves it. And so he's definitely went that path, so that, of course, as soon as I heard Peter Finch, actor, I think, okay, Bradley, my son, must be connected in some way. And as I'm reading his Wikipedia, then next thing, after all his acting accolades, he was also known for being in a famous battle in World War II called the Battle of Darwin. He was a gunner. So he's a real guy. He's an actor, and he's from World War II. He was in World War II. So I'm like, wow, chills. Like, this came across the veil. Later that day, I'm going to play tennis. My friend is already en route to the courts. And now my son asks me fairly often if I can help him with doing an audition self-tape, because he'll have to read lines and submit it, and he needs someone to bounce lines off, right? Play the other party. And so he texts me as I'm walking out the door to play tennis, and I'll get messages from him often like, "Hey, can you help me with the self-tape, tomorrow," or whatever. Usually it's like that, and that's about the information I get, and we'll do a few at a time or whatever. This one was kind of urgent. "Hey, Dad, it's last minute. I got to turn it in within an hour. I just got a request through my agent, and it's for a new World War II show," which he normally doesn't share what it's about either. And I'm like, okay, I'm canceling tennis. I would not have canceled in normal circumstances, but because of the dream, I did. And I'm reading opposite lines. Now, keep in mind, my grandmother was with him, Moo, who I was really close to. As I'm reading lines with him, I'm like, "Hey, Cadet, how about I just stand behind you and say Moo," which is what we called her. So now I'm calling him Moo, and he turns it in. Later that next day, usually these things have a lot of, lapse in time. You hear back months, weeks later. Next day, he gets, "We want you. You're perfect." 2 days later, he's in the trenches as a gunner in a World War II pilot piece for, a new show they're trying to put together. Some pretty big people. So I'm wondering, maybe that'll be his big break. Or he just posted his new reel. If anyone's interested, you look up Bradley Beachum, you'll see his acting reel. He just did a new one. He was waiting for a new one to put some of that footage in it, because he's done a lot of student films, and that's higher production, with World War II, guns and whatever. And even in the little clip he shares, if you see the reel, he's talking about a cow in the speaking role. So yeah, there's one that happened very recently that was like, wow, hadn't had that happen before, where information that comes across the veil leads to, in real life, results, right?
Yeah, that's a great story. It's a reminder to look out for synchronicities because they're often there. Sometimes they're subtle, but they were really obvious ones, weren't they?
There really is. And I think that excitement, I've always brought that childlike wonder and excitement to it. And I think I have a friend who every time he sees me, he's like, Mr. Synchronicity, it's like his, and I have a lot of them. And I think it's because of that. Like, I'm here, I am telling the story, and it's just as fun and as exciting as when it happened. And, and I think that's really the thing for people to look out for. You get into that state of expecting, as Wayne Dyer would put it, I am realistic. I expect miracles. And you get into that energetic state, and the universe really, really responds.
Now you mentioned you started with out of body experiences. Robert Monroe is my favorite. I think that was probably a similar
The Monroe Institute.
Yeah, it's interesting,
Virginia,
actually.
where I'm from.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think that was actually the first set of books I read, and then I went into Neil Donald Walsh. And but have there been any other books or films or teachers or podcasters that have really had a significant impact on your personal growth?
Great question. Let's see, a book or I had a schedule yesterday, and we had an issue for some reason. We had a technical glitch, let's say. But I was supposed to interview for the second time. I interviewed him many, many years ago, Dr. Bruce Lipton. He wrote a great book called The Biology of Belief. And I highly recommend that book for the people that are really science leaning, or Dr. Joe Dispenza, another great guy who let's look at the science of this stuff. But what The Biology of Belief basically shows is, epigenetics, this idea we've been told, when we were kids, hey, it's in your genes. Well, guess what? Your genes turn off and on based off your beliefs. And he shows the science of that. So, for example, I've told the story my whole life. I don't believe in getting sick. I just made that up, right? And not going to say I've never been sick. I have, but very rarely. Never been in a hospital, no aches and pains, no, and it's belief creates reality. You are the creator and created rolled into one. And what does source do? It creates. So you're spelling with you're casting a spell. Your words are your wands. Abracadabra translates to I create as I speak, is actually the meaning. And that's what we're doing all the time with our beliefs. And so I really like The Biology Belief, or Becoming Supernatural by Joe Dispenza is another great one, where it just really helps to show the science of how this stuff really works. And a lot of the mystics have been saying this for eons, and now you have, physics, quantum physics, and it's really supporting a lot of this.
Yeah, I'd add Tom Campbell, who's another physicist to that list as
Cool.
well. Yeah, who's
amazing.
Very interesting.
Yeah,
although it's a long. He wrote My Big Toe, which is a trilogy. It's a decent. I think it took me about 3 months to get through all 3 books.
Cool. Wow.
Yeah.
That sounds intense. I'll have to. I wrote his name down. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. All right. So tell it your Positive Head podcast. So tell us how that began. How's that evolved over time?
I started out really wanting to. If you listen to episode 1, going back to, 9 years ago now, you'll hear me say this is a way for me to get my excitement about consciousness and the ultimate nature of reality and ideas around spirituality out to someone other than my poor friends and families, whose ears have been bleeding for the last, 15 years or 20 years or whatever. So that's really, that you'll hear it in episode 1. And so that was the idea. And, I was really blessed, I think, being my timing. I didn't do a lot of the social media stuff and, promotions and things. And I think right time, right place. And, my show really reached a lot of people, top 5 for many years on iTunes, Apple Podcast, and spirituality. And so that really led to me having the opportunity to mix it up with people like Neil Donald Walsh and, others. And so, yeah, it's really been a labor of love. I started doing 5 episodes a week. At first, it
Wow.
was just interview style. And then I was like, oh my gosh, Brandon, you are way too verbose talking over your poor guests. You need more space. So I started doing 5 days a week. Only recently, a few months ago, did I go back down to one a week. So that's why I have 2,300 episodes or something, tremendous amount of content. And, for the last few years, I did have a woman, Dr. Erica Middlemiss, doing 2 of the episodes a week, and I would do 3. And now just wanting to free up energy to do other things, I've cut back to 1. I did shoot pre-COVID 17 episodes of a late night style show called Optimistic, which I'm really proud of. It's like a live audience and interview and retreat guests would spend. I run a co-living and event space here in Los Angeles called the Mystic Manor. And so they would come spend a week on retreat here and then be a part of the show. And then, visionary artist and musical performance and, full late night style show. So we did a bunch of those episodes as well. And now I'm really just about to start down the path of doing some filming again for the first time with a new project called Mystic Society, which is like a membership based organization with regular gatherings. And we're going to have different guests like, a Matt Kahn or whoever as they come through town, like kind of filming more casual talk and how they interact with all the rest of the community and trying to do something a little different than just straight interview too. So that's kind of the latest and greatest project. That is, I guess you would say is an offshoot or iteration of, the podcast.
There's a lot of people wanting to get into podcasting. I think especially in this space. I mean, I've only been doing this for about a year. And
Okay.
so, someone like yourself, I think, has got a lot of valuable advice. So what would you say to someone who's, say, wanting to start a podcast to share their message, but they feel intimidated or they're not sure where they should begin?
Great question. I would say perfect is the enemy of good enough. And oftentimes we can get so in our head around, how does it look? How does it sound? Is it good enough? Is it yes, just getting it out there. And we live in such a world, and this is something that, is easy for me to get caught up in too. It's like, in a sense, I was riding a wave, that I didn't play the game quite the way you're supposed to with here's 3 clips a day and here's, paying someone to grow my social media and all those things a lot of people do. And then you get caught up into numbers like, oh, how many downloads does Joe Rogan get or this person or that person? And I could be bigger. And, it's not reaching enough people and numbers never end. And so people get really caught up in that. And if you feel the urge to share a message, that's because there's someone out there who needs to hear it, that wants to hear it, that I would speculate you have a soul contract with that it's going to coming through your voice, your channel at your time. That's perfect for them and what they need. And why would you get in the way of that with a bunch of story around, comparison, the thief of joy comparison. And so stop that nonsense and realize it's like, I saw another guest on my show, Charles Eisenstein. I saw him give a talk years ago, and he said, who is more important, Gandhi or Gandhi's grandmother? And what he was getting at was is the person that raised him and led to him being who he became more valuable than the person who impacted millions and millions and millions of people? Arguably, right? So maybe you have one listener of your podcast that you come out with, and that listener is the most important listener that could hear your unique way of delivering information, your unique energetic signature. And you have now fulfilled that soul contract with that person as you intended to do without letting all the story around it. It's just same with, I was in a band many years ago, and it went from early days being so much fun, so creative and expressive and learning the instruments and getting better at writing songs, to fast forward 8 years in, our bass players at the time, no doubt, was a big band in the world. And the drummer, no doubt, was the brother of our bass player. And we were surrounded by all these big bands that, went on to be massive. And now it's went from being fun to we've got to make it or else something's wrong and bad. And, and it comparison, the thief of joy. And so it took the fun out of it, and it became more of a job. And so that's what I really recommend to anyone out there. If you feel like you've got something to say it. Get it out there. I don't care how you get it out there, just get it out there. And judging how many people tune in, that's not for you to decide. That's, you're going to get and have the reach that's perfect for your soul's journey. If you are meant to be the biggest podcaster ever, that will happen. If that's what's going to serve the evolution and growth of your soul and the expansion of your consciousness, that's what's ideal. That's what'll happen. If you only reaching 10 people and your mom being 9 of them replaying the episode, then that's what's going to happen. Whatever is meant and is right for your growth and good is what will transpire. And your job is to get out of the way of all the story and expectation and needing it to be anything other than you following that impulse to do the thing.
That's terrific. I'll have to get my son to watch this because he's just started a YouTube channel, and there's loads of good advice in there.
He's probably falling into some of that, especially the younger kids,
Yeah.
like, oh my gosh, well, so-and-so, Mr. Beast made $50 billion in 10, by the time he's 12 or whatever. Like, who cares? That's not about you. That's his journey. And by the way, how many times do you see these people that are gazillionaires by the time they're 21, and by the time they're 31, they're like drug addicts, strung out. They have their own path. I'm not saying that always happens, but you know what I mean? It's like you are your own unique being with your own unique trajectory. And you're always comparing apples to oranges if you're trying to look at what someone else's path is. It's like your soul will get what it needs for its growth. It's here. Eckhart Tolle puts this really well. People think the world is here to make them happy. That's the big misconception, is like the world is here to make me happy. And for some reason, I'm getting gypped because I'm not as happy as I should be. Right? It's something they've been sold that's actually incorrect. The world is here to make you conscious. Happiness is not always aimed. That's a great byproduct. But your soul, if you need money to foster your consciousness growth, you won't be able to avoid it. Your soul will see to it that happens to meet its aim of maximum growth, right? If money would get in the way of your maximum growth, then you won't be able to get it no matter what. So understanding that there's something bigger at play, and it's your soul doesn't care about these things that you care about so much. It cares about what helps you to get conscious. And, when you can sort of relax into that, knowing that it's happening for you, not to you, and not being too caught up on all that stuff, you're judging it as good if you get more followers or you're more successful. You don't know. You can't really say that. That may be the worst thing that ever happens to you. Just trust the mystery, trust the process, and take the steps, follow that inclination without all the BS in the way.
You've got a lot of projects going on, podcasting and TV stuff. And so have you got any sort of practices that keep you grounded, keep you kind of on track, manage to keep all those balls in the air without things getting out of balance?
Yeah, my number one practice, 8 hours of sleep a night. That to me, there are certainly people more disciplined with meditation and their morning routine. That's a big thing. And, I do all those things. I do yoga some. I do meditation some. I work out some. I play tennis. I love to wax poetic about, this is therapy for me. It's like, I love doing this because what are we doing right now? We're stepping into a vibrational pool together as we talk about these magical stories and perspectives, and it's setting a vibrational tone that everyone's being drawn into together. And we're feeling that which is likened to itself is drawn. Water seeks its own level. So if I'm vibrating at a certain frequency with more and more regularity, then, I'm attracting things that are a match to that vibrational offering. So that becomes the only game, is managing your vibration. And for each of it's different. Listening to a podcast, reading a book. To me, I love playing paddle tennis. I love, I do enjoy meditation, and there are, like I said, people that are way more disciplined than me. I I tend to have a lot of energy and can sometimes be like, oh, I don't want to sit there. I want to go do something, Now, someone like Osho said it really well years ago. He said, if you're too busy, everyone should meditate 20 minutes a day. Unless you're too busy, you should meditate for an hour, Or he also said, don't just do something, sit there. And, my initials are BBB. It's one of the keys in my book, The Golden Key. Learning to be, I think, speaking of synchronicities, breadcrumbs, the universe was trying to tell me something because I can do a lot. and I'm learning to BBB. And so it's like, look, we're going to bake it into your name so you can hopefully get this one. And so it's a daily conscious effort to slow down and realize sometimes the best results come from you taking the time and making the time for self-care and all those things. And so I certainly dabble and do all of it. And there's no surefire regiment for me that is my most important element, other than sleep and really practicing gratitude. I really work every day on saying out loud, wow, I'm so grateful for this today. Wow, look at this room. Look at the house that I'm in. Oh man, my partner cares so much, just really tuning into that stuff more. My book I wrote a couple years ago, which I'd love to gift to the audience, by the way. It's called The Golden Key, Modern Alchemy to Unlock Infinite Abundance. And the number one way to tap into abundance is by finding appreciation for what you already have. You instantly are tapping into that vibration, which then attracts more of things that are a match for that, right? So that's really, finding gratitude and appreciation for what is, and lots of sleep are probably the two things that I do, really well.
Yeah, I agree. I think once I turned 50, the sleep was what was not the number one priority. And then I just decided, okay, like I've been doing that for long enough. It's just got to be sleep first and then work out everything else after that. And yeah, you definitely feel a lot better.
Everything comes from that. Like the studies that they show, forget the guy's name. There was a guy on Joe Rogan's podcast maybe a year or so ago, and he's a sleep expert. And some of the statistics and info around how stunted you are with less sleep it's pretty profound. And so I think making that a priority is mine. And I know there's a lot of people struggle with sleep, and and of course that can come from being too in your head instead of in your heart. One of the keys in my book is trust the mystery. Getting to a place as much as possible. I don't know why this has happened. This isn't what I would choose. I can't see the forest for the trees as to why this is happening, but I trust it. I trust that it's happening for me, not to me. I do know and believe that my higher self is playing chess. I'm playing checkers. I think I should go here, but it's like, have you ever heard the story of the Taoist farmer?
No.
It's a great story. I'll share if you don't mind. It's a pretty quick one. So Taoist farmer is someone who has a lot of, basically Taoism is these same sort of beliefs on the oneness of all things and perspectives that are very much aligned with a lot of my own. And so this Taoist, he has a farm, and one day his horse runs away, and his neighbors, who think very short-sighted, very, judging the book by its cover kind of thing. Not necessarily think life is happening for them. They think it's happening to them. And it comes over and says, oh my gosh, we see your horse ran away. You are screwed. Like that is, your only horse to help you till your fields. And without it, you can't get the job done. And the Taoist farmer, looking through this lens that I'm sort of referencing here, he says, oh, maybe so. I don't know. Maybe it's good. Maybe it's bad. I'm kind of detached in a healthy way. Next day, the horse comes back. This time it has a second horse, a wild horse that followed it home. So all of a sudden, the Taoist farmer went from being without any horse to having double the horsepower. The neighbors see this, come over and say, oh my gosh, we thought you were screwed. Now we realize what a blessing in disguise. You've got two horses now. Taoist farmer says, maybe so. Next day, his son, his only human helper, tries to tame the wild horse, gets on it, gets thrown, falls off, breaks his leg. Neighbors observe this, come over and say, oh my gosh, we thought you were screwed. Then we thought you were blessed when the horse came back. Now we know you're screwed because without your son to help you till the fields, you're no chance. Dallas farmer says, maybe so. Maybe I am. Next day, the military comes around collecting young men to take them off to battle. Front line, sure to die. And they come knocking on the Dallas farmer's house, but his son, to collect his son, but he's laid up in bed with a broken leg. They have to leave him because he's no good to them. And he lives as a result. Neighbors come over, thought you were screwed. Then we thought you were blessed, thought you were screwed. Now we can see you're blessed. What do you think the Dallas farmer said? Maybe so. And I love that story because it really paints it concisely. Here we are constantly judging with our little human mind. Meanwhile, there's this much more complex tapestry happening. But if you can move into that state of trusting the mystery and, always looking through the lens of, why is this happening for me? What, I wouldn't have chosen it, but I trust that there's something here for me that I'm meant to get from it. So I'm going to look for that. And it's easy when it's something that you prefer, right? Where it comes into, shows what you're made of when you can really do that through the challenge. And, reality is, smooth seas never made for a skilled sailor, and you came to be a skilled sailor. So,
It's a great,
so yeah.
great story. I want to get to your book, but something else I want to ask you is, what advice would you have for 25-year-old Brandon if you were able to provide it?
It's funny because I get to do that all the time because my son is 25. What I would, the biggest piece of advice I think this younger generation has really, in the age of social media where it's filters and putting, my best foot forward to try and show how glamorous my life is and maybe even fibbing a little bit here and there or a lot of it, getting too caught up on that whole thing, I think is really, it's really damaging. I think it's been damaging to a lot of people. In one way, social media brings us together more than other. In another, it created more isolation. So, what I would say is, there's a famous quote, a clip that floated around the internet a lot of Jim Carrey talking at a graduation. And he talked about his father going, you may have seen this, and pursuing he's like, my father could have been a great comedian, but he didn't believe that was possible for him. So he went and became an accountant or whatever. And then when I was 12 or 15 or whatever, he lost that job and lost everything. And the lesson Jim learned from that was from his father is, I can fail at doing what I don't want. So I might as well pursue what I do want. And, so with my son, he's pursuing art. He's pursuing something he's passionate about. And there's a world out there that will tell you your chances of making it and supporting yourself and acting is so minuscule, and go get the job at the, bank or whatever it is. And I would say whatever lights you up the most is there's something there for you. And it may not lead to you become the great next, big rock star or whatever, but you'll learn something along the way, and then it'll lead to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. So I think if you can constantly tune back into what is my highest excitement, in trusting that if I am floating in eternity right now. So what that really means, if we could wrap our human minds around it, is infinite time, no time before this moment, I have existed and somehow survived and gotten through whatever came. Change is guaranteed no matter what. So if you love something, you better appreciate it because it's guaranteed to change. If you don't prefer something, guess what? It's guaranteed to change. So let's latch on to that in that moment. Here you are in eternity right now, and which science shows time is an illusion. If you shoot me in outer space and bring me back a day later, I'm a day older and you've been dead 100 years or something, right? So we know that time truly is illusory. Here you are, and somehow you've survived and you've made it and you still exist, and you're going to still exist tomorrow, and you're going to still exist in 1 billion Earth years from now in some capacity that we can't even fully comprehend. And so you start living from this eternal perspective and not scarcity of, there's not enough and lack, and you in trusting that you'll get what you need if you're being true. Be true. they did a study recently. I think it's MIT was involved, where they were trying to they can actually measure different emotional, frequencies, and people, a lot, you would guess what would be the strongest. Love, right, is what most people would say. What they found was authenticity is 4 times stronger than love. In whatever their measurement, you can look up the study and learn more about it. But I found that very fascinating. Be authentic. If you're being authentic, true to who and what your heart is saying is your truth and your highest excitement, you're 4 times more powerful than if you're being loving. And so you wonder why you're ineffective if you're not being authentic, not following your highest choice because of a belief. Henry Ford said, whether you think you can or think you can't, you're right, because you are creating, you're spelling, you're casting spells with your beliefs. So be authentic, because that makes you powerful, and that's measurable now. That vibrational offering of your authenticity. If you're trying to emulate someone else, oh, this is the way to be the next big song or whatever, you're not being authentic. It's literally felt at levels we can't even understand why we don't like it so much. So, but if you're being your authentic self, now you're onto something.
Right. So I want to ask you about your book and anything else that you've got going on, just so if people want to get in touch with you or find out more about you. And there was something else about your book that I wanted to. I think I read somewhere that you had a vivid dream that inspired that. So if you could tell us about what happened there too.
Yeah. So that's another one of my fun synchronicity stories, which, by the way, if you don't mind, I'll throw out how people can get the book for free.
Sure.
If they'd like to. If you go to goldenkey.gift, GIFT, and you use the code LOVE at checkout, you can download the audio and/or ebook. And it's about 3 hours to listen to. I narrate it, or 100 pages to read, and you can get both with the code if you want. Yeah, so I had a dream during COVID, early on in COVID, to about the book and sort of the concept and sort of the gamification. There's some gamification element to it and fun in there. And so I went and I was like, okay, I would call it the Golden Key. And I got inspired, right? I was following that inspiration in spirit, right? Inspiration. And there is something that was called the Golden Key, a short, very short sort of essay that's kind of famous from 100 years ago. Oh, what do you know? It was published on my birthday. Yeah, 100, and so I have a lot of synchronicity with my birthday. It's my dad's birthday. It's my grandmother's birthday. My great-grandmother died on that day. Ex-business partner and villain in my hero's journey tale I write about in the book, his baby mama and grandmother, my birthday, and on and on. It's, ex-girlfriend whose boyfriend committed suicide on that day, named Anson. All my relatives are from Anson, North Carolina, with that birthday, and it just goes and goes. That's another great, it's just reflecting me back to me in my own private YOU universe, as I talk about in the book. We're all in our own universe. You're the lead actor, director, star, your own play. And so I see this Golden Key, and there's this gamification element to this essay that's kind of similar to what I wanted to do. And I'm like, okay, this is, it's published on my birthday. This is cool. I'm in. So then next step for me is like, okay, I need cover art. And I have a really good friend that I also share a story with, a synchronicity story in the book. That he's one of the world's greatest visionary artists. His name is Vajra, Vajra, amazing artist. And so I'm like, I'm going to see if Vajra will help me with the art for the cover. So I call him and I'm like, hey, Vajra, I had this dream, and here's a synchronicity, my birthday, and the gamification of this book that was written, or essay written 100 years ago that's really well known. And yeah, I give him my whole spiel. Would you help me with creating the cover art for the book? And he's like, well, are you done with your spiel? He's like, now it's my turn. A couple months ago, I had a dream, and I was at your place. We call it the Mystic Manor. And I was hunting for the key to everything. And after I woke up from the dream, I was so inspired, I started a painting of a key. So would I create the cover art for your Golden Key? I started it 2 months ago from my dream that was involved you in the Mystic Manor. So yes, I will.
Wow.
So that's the cover art that you'll see, that Vajra actually collaborated with another friend digitizing it and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, so Very cool, magical sort of synchronicity there.
Excellent. I'll put a link to that in the description for you. So, yeah, you got anything final that you want to leave people with before we wrap up today's conversation?
What comes up for me when people ask that is, just to touch a little bit more on something I've already touched on, is understanding the reality of the situation within you find yourself right now as you sit hearing these words, right? And what is that situation? You are a fractal of the one source consciousness that creates and animates all things. So what does that mean as far as your worth, your potential, your value? You're as valuable, as worthy as any other being ever has been, could be, or will be, because every being is an extension of you. Hearing me right now, literally, you are the lead actor, director in your own private universe, YOU universe. And you've created me in the image to sound like this, to look like this. And really, all I am is an extension of the consciousness that animates your form. And I'm a prop in your movie, and vice versa. I'm the star here. Of course I make it, right? This is my universe. You're a prop in my universe. Everywhere you go, you're there waiting for yourself. So anytime you're falling into these doubts, and by the way, this doesn't mean become a spiritual narcissist, because remember, the greatest of the great is an extension of you. The lowest of the low is an extension of you. It is all you, right? And it is all necessary for source to know itself. It can't know that which it is unless it knows that which it is not. That's the question being posed to you right now is, what part of it all would you like to experience next? None of it's more valid or less valid than the other. You want to be poor on the street, homeless? That's a very brave choice for a soul to experience. When you're floating in eternity, I could see why you maybe would want to have that experience to understand the contrast, because you can't know that what you are unless you know that what you are not. You know, my brother, he got arrested years ago for not paying a ticket and got pulled over, forgot about it, threw him in jail, super sensitive, comes out days later, the most sensitive guy I know. I feed him a hot pocket at 12:30 in the morning, midnight, and he hadn't eaten in days, and he's been to a lot of fancy dinners. And if you ask him to this day, what is the best meal you ever had? It's that hot pocket, because of the contrast of what he had just been through. And that's what Source is doing. That's what it's doing with all the hardship and pain and darkness. And evil is live spelled backwards. The higher the branches, the deeper the roots. People don't know. Reaching way up to the heavens, it's got super deep roots into the darkness, right? And that's what's happening. That's the game that's being played. None of it is more or less valid than any other experience. What part of it all do you want to experience next? And if you're telling the story of not being worthy of whatever greatness you'd love to have in your life, hey, that's an experience too. And it'll make it more meaningful in your next life when you overcome that. So by all means, it's not wrong, but would you like to have it be now that you really tap into the truth of who and what you are, and the worthiness of who and what you are, and feel that fully? For me, no better time than the present. So that's what I invite each and every one of you to start doing. Stop playing small and telling the small story that just isn't based in the truth of the situation in which you find yourself.
Brandon, I've thoroughly enjoyed today's conversation. I really appreciate you and what you talk about, and I wish you well. So thanks for being here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. It's been a pleasure.